If you have taken your Silverado, Sierra, Tahoe, Suburban, Yukon, or Escalade in for the L87 engine recall, I want you to go find your service invoice right now, because there is a very real chance the oil weight written on that paper does not match what is actually sitting in your crankcase. GM changed the correct oil spec on this recall back in February, quietly without a press release, and most service departments are still writing up invoices the old way. I am going to show you exactly what should be on that paper and how to check what your dealer actually put in your engine. Here is the background you need before any of this makes sense. Every L87 6.2-liter V8 left the factory calling for 0W20 oil, a light, thin viscosity Dexos Gen 3 fluid designed purely to help GM hit fuel economy numbers. Then the recall hit. GM's own service bulletin for the 2021 through 2024 model year trucks and SUVs affected by the rod bearing and crankshaft defect instructs technicians to inspect the engine first. If it passes inspection, meaning it does not need a full replacement, the fix is not a mechanical repair at all. It is an oil change to a much thicker 0W40 fluid, specifically a licensed Dexos R product. That thicker oil creates a heavier film between the bearing surfaces and the crankshaft journals, which is meant to compensate for parts that may already be slightly out of tolerance from the factory. Thicker oil does not fix the defect. It buys the bearing more cushion, so metal is less likely to touch metal while the truck is still under warranty and out of the litigation window. That distinction matters, and I will come back to it. Now, here is where it gets messy, and this is the part almost nobody is talking about. When GM first rolled out the recall remedy, dealers were instructed to use one specific product, Mobil 1 Supercar 0W40, the same formulation used in the C8 Corvette Z06. That oil is expensive, and more importantly, it was never produced in the volume needed to service roughly 600,000 recalled vehicles nationwide. By this past February, GM issued an updated bulletin to every dealer telling them that once their supercar inventory ran dry, they were to switch to Mobil 1 FS 0W40 instead. Same viscosity number on paper, same Dexos R certification, but a different formulation more commonly used in European high-performance applications, and considerably cheaper and easier for dealers to keep in stock. On the surface, that sounds like a boring supply chain footnote. In practice, I have had 3 trucks come through my shop in the last 2 months where the invoice still listed supercar as the product used, the sticker on the oil cap still referenced the old spec, and when I actually drained the pan, what came out was clearly not what the paperwork claimed. In one case, it looked like the tech had simply grabbed whatever 0W40 was sitting on the shelf and never updated the paperwork to match what GM's current bulletin actually requires. A customer of mine, a woman named Denise, who drives a 2023 Tahoe, had her truck in for the recall inspection back in March. Her invoice came back showing the oil change was performed, viscosity listed as 0W40, Dexos R checked as a box. Looked fine on paper. She brought the truck to me 4 months later for an unrelated brake job, and out of habit, I checked her oil cap and dipstick markings against her paperwork because I had already seen this discrepancy twice that month on other customers' trucks. Her cap still had the original factory 0W20 sticker on it. No updated Dexos R label anywhere under the hood. When I pulled a sample, the fluid tested significantly thinner than any 0W40 should read at operating temperature. Best guess, somewhere between the recall inspection and the oil change line, someone either grabbed the wrong bulk tank or never actually completed the viscosity swap, and the box on the invoice got checked anyway. Denise had been driving 4 months believing she had the protective thicker oil in her engine when she almost certainly did not. This is not me accusing every GM dealer of fraud. Service departments are slammed right now specifically because of how many L87 trucks are cycling through for this exact recall, and mistakes happen when a shop is processing dozens of these a week with a spec that changed midstream. But a mistake on a normal oil change costs you maybe a quart of the wrong fluid. A mistake on this specific service on an engine GM itself is flagged as having a bearing defect that can cause sudden loss of propulsion is not a minor clerical error. It is the difference between having the extra protective margin GM engineered this fix around or driving around with the exact same thin factory oil that was already sitting in the engine when the defect was flagged in the first place. So here is exactly what to check, and it takes about 5 minutes. Pop the hood and look at the oil fill cap itself. If your truck went through the recall remedy and passed inspection, GM's own bulletin requires the technician to install a new oil cap or an updated label showing 0W40 Dexos R. If your cap still shows the original 0W20 Dexos 1 language, that is your first red flag because it means either the label was never updated or the correct oil was never actually installed. Next, pull your service invoice and look specifically for the product name, not just the viscosity number. As of this past February, a correctly completed invoice on a truck serviced after that date should reference Mobile 1FS0W40 rather than Supercar, unless your specific dealer still had legitimate leftover Supercar inventory documented on the paperwork. If your invoice from a recent visit still says Supercar with no explanation, or worse, if it just says 0W40 with no brand or product listed at all, call your service advisor and ask them to confirm exactly which product was used and pull the batch or lot number from their bulk oil records. A reputable shop can produce that in minutes. If they cannot, that tells you something on its own. Third, and this is the check most owners skip entirely, have a shop pull an oil sample and check the actual measured viscosity against what the paperwork claims, especially if your truck is more than a few months out from the recall service. This does not need to be an expensive lab analysis. Most independent shops, mine included, can run a basic viscosity comparison in-house using a simple kinematic viscosity test for under $40, and it will immediately tell you whether what is in the pan behaves like a 0W40 or something closer to the original thinner factory fill. If the numbers do not line up with what your invoice claims, you have grounds to go back to the dealer and demand they redo the service correctly, and you will want documentation in hand before that conversation, not after. One more wrinkle you need to know about because it trips up a lot of owners who think they are being proactive. If your L87 failed inspection and got a full engine replacement instead of the oil viscosity fix, the replacement engine goes back to the original 0W20 spec, not 0W40. GM's logic here is that a freshly built replacement engine does not carry the same suspect tolerances as the original units, so there is no reason to run the thicker oil. I have had 2 customers get confused by this and try to insist their shop put 0W40 in a brand new replacement engine because they heard thicker was safer, which is backwards from what GM's own engineering data supports for that specific scenario. And if your L87 was built in the 2019, 2020, or 2025 model year, none of this applies to you at all because those production years fall outside the recall window entirely and should stay on the original 0W20 spec unless your specific dealer has separately identified an issue with your engine. If this kind of paperwork detective work is saving you from a $9,000 mistake, hit subscribe because I dig through service bulletins and dealer invoices every week looking for exactly this kind of gap between what GM says should happen and what is actually happening on the shop floor. Drop a comment telling me what your L87 invoice actually says because I want to know how widespread this labeling problem really is beyond the handful of trucks I have personally caught. I want to be clear about what this does and does not mean for you. This is not evidence that dealers are intentionally cutting corners on a safety recall. Most of what I am describing looks like ordinary supply chain confusion after GM changed a spec mid-recall without making much noise about it, combined with service departments moving fast through a huge volume of the same job. But ordinary confusion on a defect this serious still leaves your engine sitting with less protective margin than GM's own fix is supposed to provide, and nobody at the dealership is going to call you to double-check their own paperwork. That job falls on you. 5 minutes checking your oil cap sticker and your invoice against what I just walked you through is the difference between actually having the protection GM engineered into this recall or driving around with a checked box on a piece of paper and the same thin factory oil that was already in there when this whole mess started. 20-plus years in this business has taught me that the gap between what a service bulletin says and what actually happens on a Tuesday afternoon in a busy dealership service bay is where most of these preventable failures live. Go check your cap. Go check your invoice. If they do not match what GM's current bulletin actually requires, go back and make them fix it properly. In writing, take care of your truck and it will take care of you. I will see you in the next one.